Here's a story about Rube Fields and the Great Owingsville Whirlwind. My mom was born and raised in a little town in Bath County, Kentucky called Salt Lick. Mom's family, the Coutses, lived in a stone house, still standing on a hill overlooking town. There used to be a good-sized apple orchard, but that's long since gone. The county seat is Owingsville, another somewhat larger town. They've even got a couple of stoplights, about 10 to 12 miles to the west. Mom told me this story many years ago, but I've heard it repeated by both my aunts as well as some old-timers from the Owingsville area. Seems that back around the turn of the century, or shortly thereafter, there was a fellow who lived in Owingsville by the name of Rube Fields. By today's standards, he would have been called a savant. Back then, he was just called the village idiot. True, Rube was not exactly a candidate for Mensa, but he was a good-natured sort, possessed of a shy grin which gave him an unassuming manner despite his massive muscular frame. The kids often teased him. Kids can be mean that way. But Rube seemed to take it in stride, and he would often join in their games with them. Rube would take on odd jobs around town, especially those requiring heavy physical work. Every day he could be seen walking the streets with a howdy-do and that smile of his. But there was something special about Rube. Some way, somehow, Rube could always tell what time it was, day or night. He never carried a watch and never hesitated when asked to accurately pronounce the time. In fact, it almost became a standard greeting of the townspeople to throw up their hand and holler, "Morning, Rube, what time is it?" And Rube would return their greeting with the declaration of the hour and minute. Folks there in Owingsville got to where they would set their watches by Rube, and it said they even set the clock in the town hall building by Rube's averment. Well, as you might imagine, this created a dichotomy in the way the people regarded Rube. On the one hand, they laughed and scoffed at him for his simple-mindedness, yet at the same time held him in awe because of his gift. Some attached a religious significance to Rube's lot in life, observing that God must have touched him both on the shoulder and in the head. Rube was a happy sort, though, and seemed to accept the way the people took him, especially when he became the butt of their jokes. He was not without his limits, however. One day, right in the middle of town, what started out as simple teasing turned cruel. A group of kids began taunting him unmercifully, asking him questions for which they knew he did not know the answers, and then pointing out how dumb he was. They also laughed at his clothes and the way he talked. Rube attempted to walk away, but the kids followed him, throwing out ugly and hurtful remarks. He must have been relieved to see a crowd of adults gather, thinking they would put a stop to his torment. Instead, on this day, for some reason, they joined in the barbarous vexatiousness. Maybe they just didn't realize that this gentle giant, simple-minded though he might be, had feelings just like everyone else. He implored them to stop, but that just seemed to increase the onslaught of verbal harassment. All of a sudden, Rube turned to them. His body shook as if in the throes of what they used to call St. Vitus dance. His eyes rolled back, his arms reached out to the heavens, and he began to mumble. Now you have to remember that the majority of these townsfolk were fervent Bible thumpers. They weren't all Pentecostal or holy rollers, but by God, they knew a person possessed of the Holy Spirit when they saw him. Add to that Rube's already uncanny ability regarding telling time, and you had the next best thing to the second coming. Rube's arms spread wide, his eyes closed, and he spoke loudly and authoritatively. "I see a great wind, sent from the heavens, descending upon this town. I see homes and barns blown away. I see people carried away in great numbers. I see people screaming and running, but without mercy. The great whirlwind sweeps them up and devours them, and they're never seen again." At this point, Rube opened his eyes, which truly seemed to be those of a man possessed. "And this wind shall descend upon this town at 2:17 this afternoon," he declared. There was a moment of stunned silence. The people looked at Rube and then at each other. And then, as if an invisible starter's gun had sounded, the crowd broke into a run. The merchants ran back to their stores, the kids and their mothers ran home, and there began a furious and frenzied exodus from that town and its environs. By 12 noon, not a store in town remained open. By 1 o'clock, every buggy, horse, and wagon in Owingsville had been commandeered, and every possession that could be carried, packed, tied, or slung across the back of an animal had been loaded. By 2 o'clock, Owingsville was a virtual ghost town. That is, with one notable exception. Rube got to walk the streets of Owingsville, for the rest of that day amid peace and quiet, totally unmolested by kids and adults alike. Of course there was no whirlwind, and slowly, by sundown, the townspeople began to filter back into town. Mom said, maybe Rube wasn't so simple-minded after all.